Archaic Records.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Archaic Records here with you again. My name is Jamie, coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. And today we're going to go back to 1981 to take a look at what I think is one of the most important American punk rock records of all time. Damaged by California hardcore icons Black Flag. Now, Black Flag formed in Hermosa Beach, California in 1976 under the name Panic. In 1978, the band changed its name to its more familiar moniker, Black Flag. And of course, in 1981, while the band was in New York City, they recruited 20-year-old Washington, D.C. punk rocker, ice cream chucker, and self-proclaimed Black Flag superfan Henry Rollins to join them as their new lead vocalist. Now, the story of how Henry Rollins came to be in Black Flag, if not eventually become the face of Black Flag, is one of the favorite stories, I think, in all of the sort of punk rock folklore. Of course, at the time, Henry Rollins was living in his hometown of Washington, D.C. He was going to travel up to see Black Flag perform in New York. As I mentioned before, at the time, he was a self-proclaimed Black Flag superfan. He has gone on record saying at the time that they were his favorite band. So when he traveled up to New York City to see the band, he informed them that he would have to leave the show early in order to make it back to his home in Washington, D.C. in time for his early morning shift at the Haagen-Dazs ice cream stand, which he managed. Now, right before he was getting ready to leave the show that night, of course, the band famously invited Henry Rollins up on stage, where he performed a song with them. And then, as he describes it, he basically ran out of the venue and got on the road to get home and made it home in time for his early morning shift at the ice cream shop the next morning. Now, the guys in Black Flag were familiar with Henry Rollins and at least his vocal stylings through the just unbelievable album put out by Rollins' band at the time, SOA, the No Policy EP, which to me is still one of my favorite records of all time. A couple days after that show, according to what Henry Rollins says, the band called him at his home in Washington, D.C. It was either at home or at the ice cream shop. The band called him and told him that they were going to be sort of, reworking the lineup of the band and wanted to know if he wanted to come up and possibly audition to be the band's new frontman. He, according to everything I've read and seen that Henry Rollins has mentioned, he leapt at the opportunity. He jumped on the train and went back up to New York, met with the members of the band, auditioned, and I remember seeing a spoken word performance one time where Henry Rollins, where he talked about the audition for Black Flag. The band sort of went into a band meeting after that, sort of left him wondering how well he had done, and after a few minutes of the band sort of sequestered away, they came out and they offered him the gig. Henry Rollins at that point in time went back home to Washington, D.C., unsure of what he was going to do. He's always maintained the fact that he actually kind of liked working at the ice cream shop. He didn't know if this was something that he should do. He went back home, and according to everything I've heard and seen that Henry Rollins has talked about over the years, it was actually his best friend at the time, Ian Mackay, who basically told him, "This is your shot." And as Henry Rollins always describes it, he said, "Take your shot." So Henry Rollins basically threw what belongings he had together and moved out to Southern California to become the new singer of his favorite band at the time. And what I think he became, not only did he become the vocalist of Black Flag, but in a lot of ways I think he became the face of the band, and definitely the sound of the band vocally. Now, my personal relationship with Black Flag goes back to this record. This was the first Black Flag record I ever owned. This was actually the first hardcore record that I ever owned. And really, to really go back and trace my relationship with Black Flag, it all begins with my relationship with Henry Rollins. I first discovered Henry Rollins back in 1992 on MTV. I believe it was either on 120 Minutes or Headbangers Ball. When I first saw the video for the Rollins Band song Low Self-Opinion. Now, I'm pretty sure it was on 120 Minutes, although it could have been on Headbangers Ball also. I remember sort of after the whole alternative thing broke, I remember even Headbangers Ball went from playing a lot of metal stuff to eventually Headbangers Ball almost went exclusively alternative as well. I remember having friends that were still really into metal when Headbangers Ball kind of transitioned out of metal, and they weren't very happy about it. I remember even Ricky Rackman, cutting his hair. I remember he even sort of bleached it blonde and spiked it out at one point in time. So it could have been on 120 Minutes or Headbangers Ball after Headbangers Ball sort of began to become less metal-oriented. But I do remember specifically seeing the video for Low Self-Opinion, which is still a song that I absolutely love. But I remember seeing the video, and it was like nothing I had ever seen before. Rollins was like somebody I had never seen before. Now, I had no idea who Rollins was before that. I mean, I was only 11 years old in 1986 when Black Flag, broke up, so I had no idea who Black Flag was as a kid. And I remember watching this video, and at the time, it struck me as being so serious and so hardcore that it was almost funny. If you go back and you watch the video for Low Self-Opinion, it's got the stark white background. Rollins is basically standing there wearing, black shorts and, of course, a sleeveless shirt. He had really short hair. And the thing that struck me the most about him, apart from his rage and just the energy that he projected onto the screen, was the tattoos. Now, of course, this was 1992. Tattoos were not as prevalent in our culture as they are now. The same thing, I remember thinking the same exact thing. I mean, this was probably 5 years before when Guns N' Roses first came out. I remember seeing Axl Rose, and I thought that guy was just tatted to the eyeballs. But that was the thing that struck me about Henry Rollins, was this was somebody I had never seen before. I mean, who is this guy? This guy is kind of scary. His rage and his anger, and of course he's got all the tattoos. I already remember thinking, is this guy some kind of weird alt-right? I mean, alt-right wasn't really a term back then, but that's what I was thinking. It's this guy is this guy a Nazi or what? This guy is crazy. But I remember as the song played, and I remember, listening to the lyrics. I was in high school at the time, and the song Low Self-Opinion, something about it just struck a chord with me. And I remember as I was watching it, after sort of getting over the initial shock and maybe even slight humor of the video, I remember thinking to myself, man, this song was written about me. This is who I am. This is the kid that I am, and when I go to high school, and this is who I am around my peers. And I remember even thinking, is this guy looking at me? Was this song written, specifically for me? So I remember just really loving the video, and I made a note of who it was, Rollins Band. And I remember, one of my next trips into my local record stores, and I was still in high school at the time, so I didn't go to the record stores as often as I would in my older years. But I do remember going out to, I think it was one of the Tower Records or something like that in my hometown of Chico, California. And I remember I found the album, The End of Silence, on cassette. I do remember specifically that it was on cassette. And I took it home, and that was basically the song I wanted. I just basically wanted the song Low Self-Opinion. The rest of it, beyond that, was just gravy. But I remember taking the record Low Self-Opinion home, listening to it, and there was just something about it that struck me. There was something about Rollins' anger and his rage, and at the same time, how articulate he was, how well he was able to put into words things that I was sort of feeling in my kind of awkward adolescence-ness, if that's even a word. But I remember I took that tape home, I listened to it, and I really kind of wore that tape out over the course of the next year or so. And of course, Low Self-Opinion was always my favorite song on that record. But I thought that record had, a lot of really great stuff on it. I remember a couple years later, it was really a couple years later when I would say that my, Rollins fandom basically got solidified, of course, when he released the album Wait, of course, which, contained the mega hit single Liar. Now, Liar is a song that, even when it first came out, it was a song that didn't really do much for me. And nowadays, especially now that that record's 30 years old, the song Liar is a song that I could really sort of do without. But I do remember that it was that record, Wait, that I would say really, solidified me as a Rollins fan. It wasn't until after that record where I actually went back and sort of started rediscovering some of the early Rollins band stuff. In fact, to this day, I think Wait contains my favorite, at least Rollins band song in the Rollins band era of Rollins' career, which is Alien Blueprint. That was another song that came out. I think that song came out, my senior year of high school. And holy shit, that song, when I heard that song, I was like, that's me! Like, that is my high school experience. I remember seeing that, hearing that song for the first time and reading through the lyrics, and I just couldn't even believe that song was real. I couldn't believe that somebody could so almost perfectly put my high school experience into a song that was not only so well written, but just heavy and crunching and catchy at the same time. So I would still say to this day that of the Rollins era of Rollins' career, Alien Blueprint is easily my favorite song. Still to this day, just because when I first heard that song, I bought the CD Wait when it came out, and I used to play that song Alien Blueprint just on repeat for hours when I get home from school. I think that record came out my senior year of high school. I used to listen to that song on repeat for hours as soon as I get home from school. But I would say that, like I said, at that point, I would say that was probably where my Rollins fandom was really solidified. Of course, I had the End of Silence, but after Wait came out and I heard songs like Disconnected and especially Alien Blueprint, and I really loved the last song on Wait. I think the song was called Shine. Now, there were a few songs on Wait that to me were not necessarily the greatest thing I've ever heard. I've always disliked the song Wrong Man. I've never liked that song. And, like I said, the song Liar at the time, it didn't do a lot for me. Now, when I hear the song Liar, it's just like skippage to me every time. But that's what inspired me to go back and dig through, the earlier stuff in the Rollins band catalog. And I went back and I bought some of that stuff when I could find it on either cassette or CD, and it was all stuff that I really, liked a lot. Now, I was always sort of more into the End of Silence, because that was the first tape I ever bought of his. I would say now, if I had to go back and judge the Rollins, catalog, Lifetime is probably my favorite album, but Alien Blueprint is probably still my favorite Rollins band song. But at a certain point, I realized that Henry Rollins was the lead singer of Black Flag. Now, I don't really remember how I discovered this. It may have been on MTV. It may have been in sort of a magazine interview or something. But at some point, I discovered that Henry Rollins was the lead singer of Black Flag. And Black Flag was a band that I had seen, T-shirts of and stickers of and album covers of. But, at the time, they didn't really mean much to me. Like I said, I was 11 years old when this band broke up. But discovering that Henry Rollins was the singer of this band, Black Flag, to me, it was almost like when I first discovered that Billy Idol was the singer of Generation X. It was like, it opened up my eyes to this whole new band, this whole new era of somebody's career that I was already a huge fan of. Now, Rollins may not necessarily be enamored with the idea of being compared to Billy Idol. I have seen Rollins do spoken word on several occasions, and on a couple of occasions I've seen him. He has taken a few shots at the former Generation X lead singer, although I have to say, I think it was either last year or the year before, Billy Idol finally got his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. For whatever that's worth, it's something that I think is overdue. I'm a huge Billy Idol fan. I'm a huge Generation X fan, so I have no problem with it. But I couldn't help but notice when Billy Idol was honored at the Hollywood Walk of Fame, who was standing next to him in all the pictures? That's right, it's our old pal Hank, who on several occasions over the years I have seen diss Billy Idol in his spoken word performances fairly ruthlessly, I must say. So I don't know if this was a situation where Henry was like, hey, I can get my picture taken, or if he and Billy Idol have somehow managed to bury whatever little nastiness there was between them. Now, I know that Henry Rollins is a Generation X fan. He's mentioned that on several occasions. I think his issue with Billy Idol was more with MTV Billy Idol in the 1980s. But when Billy Idol got honored at the Hollywood Walk of Fame, Henry Rollins was standing there right next to him. So I don't have a problem. I love both those guys. But it's just ironic because I have seen Henry Rollins just thrash Billy Idol on a spoken word. But hey, if they're friends now, I think that would be pretty snug. Anyway, I do remember after discovering that Henry Rollins was a singer of Black Flag, and I felt as if I had a lot of, or at least most of his Rollins band material. I went out specifically on an occasion to my local record store, and this was the record that I was looking for. I remember I had seen a picture of this album cover before I specifically went out looking for it, and I remember thinking two things. Basically, if this has Henry Rollins on it, I want it no matter what. And two, just based on the album cover itself, I have to hear this. This is something that I am going to enjoy just based on the album cover. And if at the time, like I said, I was a huge Rollins band fan, I was like, that's Rollins. I mean, this picture just epitomizes what Rollins is. So I took this record home. I could not wait to listen to it. I took this album home. I think it was on CD. I took this album home. I listened to it, and I got to be honest with you. This record, the first time I listened to it, it kind of like freaked me out, man. It was not what I was expecting. I was totally unfamiliar with hardcore at that point in time. Like I said, my sort of, my first real dive into the punk rock world was things like Generation X. I was a huge Generation X fan. Billy Idol. A lot of the first wave band stuff, a lot of the first wave era of punk rock. That was really my luggage at the time. I was not super familiar with hardcore. This was not something that, just came second nature to me. So I took this record home, I listened to it, and at first I was just like, I don't know, this is not what I was expecting. I think I was expecting Alien Blueprint. I think I was expecting, what am I doing here? And I was expecting Low Self-Opinion. And at the time, I thought that Rollins' band were loud and angry and visceral. And man, that was nothing, son. I mean, compared to this, the Rollins band was Air Supply. And this was something that took me a while to sort of get used to. I remember putting this record on the first time, and I was really like, I don't know about this. I was very unsure of it. But at the same time, I was such a Rollins fan at the time, I was determined that I was going to understand it, I was going to get it. Because even though it was a little bit over my head at the time, and looking back on it, I don't think there's anything wrong with admitting that a record is a little bit over your head. I was determined that I was going to get it because there was something in the energy, there was something in that rage and the anger that I initially, related to. But, this was just a little bit out of my comfort zone. This was a little bit too much into the deep end as far as hardcore goes. And like I said, I wasn't a hardcore fan at the time. This was the first hardcore record I ever owned. And after a few, listens, it sort of, kind of began to resonate with me. And it eventually grew to the point, in a relatively short period of time, I would say, that this was a record that I really loved. And eventually I went out and I rediscovered most of the Black Flag, catalog. But for me, this was a record that was really beyond my comfort zone. It was very challenging to me the first time I heard it. And this is a record still, I've been listening to it over the past couple days, trying to sit down and kind of get some ideas, scribbled out about it. And this is a record that still to this day, I've been listening to this record now, for 30 years. This is a record that is still challenging. To me, this record is a record that is still, one of the most elite, like I said at the beginning, one of the most important, at least American punk rock records, of all time. As far as Henry Rollins goes, I have seen him, I believe I've seen him 9 different times over the years. I have seen him do spoken word, I believe, on 6 occasions, and I saw the Rollins Band on 3 different occasions. And I got to tell you, the first time I saw the Rollins Band, it was one of the most excited I've ever been to see any band, because I was such a huge fan of Rollins at the time. I really still am. I am still a huge fan of Henry Rollins, and it's always been fun to go see the spoken word performances when I've had an opportunity to see him. Now, if you go see Rollins Band, Rollins Band is 100 miles an hour. For the duration of the show, Henry Rollins does not take a second off. He does not take a break. He basically comes out. He's in your face, visceral, as intense as you can possibly imagine. It's no wonder that Henry Rollins has sort of stepped away from doing the music thing. I understand that he's the type of person that's not going to go out there and give you 50%. He has also said over the years that he is not somebody who's going to go out and do, he's not going to go out and do the greatest hits sort of, tour. He's going to step out. He's only going to do it if he can do it on his terms and do it at 110 miles an hour, which is something I completely respect. Now, I'm fortunate in the sense that I got an opportunity to see the Rollins Band 3 times. And it's funny also, in my opinion, if you go out and you see, the Rollins Band, you have the sort of typical crowd that you would expect. You have this sort of, hardcore, punk rock, crusty, sort of shithead type of crowd. Whereas if you go see Henry Rollins do the spoken word thing, it's sort of a different type of audience. It's a lot more people who are a little bit more, buttoned down. You get a lot of those sort of guys who are, kind of the beta males with their wives who've got their balls in their bag. Very, sort of pseudo-intellectual type crowd. Whereas when you go see the Rollins Band live, you've just got the typical, like, Rollins punk rock hardcore, maniacs. Now, of course, having an opportunity to go back and see Black Flag between 1981 and 1986 would have been something that was would have been something that's just completely, mind-blowing. But like I said, I was only 11 years old when Black Flag broke up, and I didn't even discover that Rollins was the vocalist of Black Flag until probably 1994, 1995. So I completely missed the boat on that, but I am very fortunate, and I consider myself fortunate to have gotten to see the Rollins Band at least 3 times over the past, several years. Now, I have it on relatively good authority, from him directly, not that I speak to him, but I've heard that over the past couple of years, Henry Rollins has moved down to this neck of the woods. Supposedly, he actually lives relatively close to where I live, down in this particular neighborhood in Nashville, Tennessee. My wife, who follows the kind of like the Reddit world and all that around this sort of neighborhood that we live in down here in Nashville, she's really into like the sort of neighborhood gossip. She's always asking me about, what is that neighbor doing over there? Have you seen those neighbors lately? And it's like, I don't pay any attention. But my wife is really big into the whole Reddit world and all that. And apparently there's a GameStop, which is about half a block, or maybe 2 or 3 blocks. I shouldn't say half a block. About 2 blocks from my house here in Nashville, where Henry Rollins is apparently seen pretty frequently. There's also a sandwich shop over there where people have claimed to have seen him. And for one thing, it's hard to imagine, Rollins hanging out at GameStop. For some reason, he doesn't necessarily strike me as a gamer. Now, I have no reason to think that, other than the fact that he just doesn't seem like the type of person who sits around playing Call of Duty. My wife always asks me, what would I do if I actually bumped into Henry Rollins in our neighborhood? Because we are always out and about, and apparently he's always out and about. So, it could happen at some point in time. And to be honest with you, I don't really know what I would do. I always tell her, after I scrubbed the log out of my trunks then I would probably really embarrass myself. I would probably be reduced to just a puddle at his feet because he is somebody that I have basically idolized since I first heard the song Low Self-Opinion, I think back in 1972. Now, during COVID, a couple years ago, I took a break from my my career, if you want to call it, what I've been doing at least for the last 21 years as a job. During COVID, I had to take sort of a break because what I do for a living involves working relatively close with the public. And of course, as a precaution during the whole COVID, thing, we all had to take a break from people that do what I do. We had to take a break during the pandemic. And so, in a way, it actually kind of worked out in my benefit because I was going through some sort of like professional, burnout anyway. It was something I was sort of looking for, at least a temporary change of career. And I remember for a while, I went to go work at an Amazon warehouse, which actually turned out to be not bad. I actually sort of enjoyed my time working at Amazon. It wasn't half bad. I know some people really complain about working at Amazon. I actually didn't think it was that bad. My one main complaint, and this is sort of a minuscule, little observation, is that they don't really pay you like super well. I mean, you can kind of live off it, but it's not comfortable. They could definitely afford to pay their employees better. But I spent about a year or so working at this Amazon warehouse, which then afforded me an opportunity to kind of move up in that industry, in the warehousing industry. So I ended up taking a job at this other warehouse, and I don't really want to, disclose what company it was, but it was a big step up as far as that sort of, industry, and it was something that this was something I was going to, consider making it kind of a permanent, career decision. It was something that getting out of Amazon was something that I wanted to do anyway. This was a big step up in pay. It was a lot more, organized, and it was just like basically a step up. Amazon is basically like entry level, and this was a step up from that. But one thing I noticed about working in the warehousing industry was you aren't exactly surrounded by Rhodes Scholars. And I'm not saying that as if, I'm a possessor of 10 PhDs. I can barely speak English, in case you couldn't tell. But it's hard to imagine the people I was working with at this warehouse job sitting around at home one day, contemplating their future and considering their options and thinking on this side, okay, I've got Harvard or I've got manual labor. I mean, you just can't really imagine that being the scenario. So a lot of the people you work with in these warehouses, they don't tend to be the most well-read or most worldly or most traveled types of people. And there was one guy in particular when I worked at this warehouse who, for some reason, he just kind of like honed in on me from the day I started to the day I left. I was somebody that he just did not like. I was somebody that he probably, didn't think that he had much in common with. Now, this was in Tennessee. And when you say to people that you live in Tennessee, maybe not Nashville specifically, because Nashville is sort of, cosmopolitan. It's got, a little bit more sophistication than you find out in the sticks, at least hopefully. And this guy was very rural Tennessee, which I think when some people think of Tennessee, it conjures up these images. Well, this was that guy. This guy was very much, small town Tennessee. This guy was about, 5'11". He was carrying around about 5 bills. And for some reason, he just did not like me. He did not want he wanted to make sure that I knew that he was always around. And, as part of my uniform every day, I always wear band shirts. That's just kind of like my thing. I'm a record collector. I'm a music nerd. That's what I do. That's just my uniform. It really has been ever since high school. And every day this guy would find me, and whatever band shirt I was wearing that day, he would have some sort of commentary on it. I remember it'd be, I'd walk in and he'd come shuffling up to me and be like, "Dead milk, man. That's stupid." And I'd just be like, ugh. It's like, leave me alone, Selmer. Well, I remember specifically one day, I came in and I was wearing a Rollins band shirt. It was the Rollins band shirt which had the album artwork for The End of Silence on it. And I remember he came up to me and he looked at it. He always had to make note of what band shirt I was wearing and, somehow throw it back in my face. And he's like, Rollins band? Is that like Rollins as in Henry Rollins? And when he said that, honestly, I almost fell right out of my chair because I was shocked that he even knew who Henry Rollins was. Not that Henry Rollins is in any way really obscure, but I was still shocked. And I was like, oh yeah, Henry Rollins. He's a Satanist, right? And I was like, excuse me? What'd you say? Now, normally, I would just sort of like let that kind of thing go, especially with a guy like that. I don't really care. I don't really want to engage with this person. So, if he would have said something like, he's a commie pinko. He's, he likes those homosexuals. Something like that, I just wouldn't have I would have just like, whatever, I don't really care about it. It's like, Satanist? Where did you hear that he's a Satanist? Oh, it's common knowledge. Everybody knows that. And I was like, I don't think he's a Satanist, man. I mean, you can say a lot of things about him, but I don't think he's a Satanist. And I remember he sort of began lecturing me. He's like, yeah, you better know who these guys are before you wear their shirts. Otherwise, people may think things about you, I was like, dude, what in the hell are you talking about? So, if I ever get a chance to meet Henry Rollins in this neighborhood around me somewhere, as apparently he lives close to me, that will be my sort of foot in the door. Be like, are you really a Satanist? And of course he'll say no, because I'm sure he isn't. And I'll be, well, there's some hillbilly around here who's spreading the word that you are. Anyway, let's get into this record just a little bit. Finally, this record came out in December of 1981. This album features, of course, Henry Rollins on vocals, Dez on guitar and vocals, guitarist Greg Gannon, bass by Charles Dukowski, and Robo on drums. Like I said, this was the first hardcore record I ever owned, and it was something that, at least for me, took a lot of getting used to. I wish I could tell you that I was cooler than that, and I immediately, embraced it and never looked back. But this was a record that really took a long time to sort of grow on me. But once it did, and like I said at the time, I was committed that I was going to like this record because I was such a huge Rollins fan, and there was just something about the energy and the anger and the nervosa of this record that I completely related to, even though sonically it was something that was a little bit over my head to begin with. I remember the first time I heard this record, I was like, is this even music? I don't even know what this is. Like I said, for me at the time, punk rock was Ready, Steady, Go by Generation X. So this was a big step forward in my, evolution. The first song on this record, of course, is one of the greatest songs of all time. And I don't care how crusty and cynical you are. Rise Above is simply one of the greatest punk rock songs ever recorded. If you're going to, at some point in time, make a compilation record which features 20 songs to throw into a time capsule for anthropologists to study 200 years from now and say, this was punk rock, the song Rise Above by Black Flag has to be on that compilation. It is non-negotiable. I mean, this song is just basically perfection. The message is semi, and the lyrics are semi, self-explanatory, but this is a song I never get sick of. Like I said, I don't care how, crusty and cynical you are, how much you want to be the guy who hates the song that everybody else likes. The song Rise Above is, in my opinion, it's basically as perfect a song as I can possibly imagine. The next song after that is a song called Spray Paint. This song clocks in at a pretty snug 33 seconds. To me, this song is your basic celebration of youth and punk rock rebellion. I love the lyric where it says, "It feels good to see disgust in their eyes." I picture this song being a Bay Area person. I picture this song as if a group of guys are, sitting on a stoop in the financial district in San Francisco in 1981, and they're all dressed in their finest punk rock regalia. And they watch the people who work in the financial district walk to and from their offices, giving them the side eye of disapproval. That's something that, when I first sort of, and this wasn't even when punk rock was a new thing, like in 1981, or, a newish thing like it was in 1981 when the song came out. But I remember, I believe it was in like 1994, 1995, the first time I gave myself a punk rock makeover. I believe I've told the story on this channel where, I cut my hair, I bleached it, I spiked it out, I started wearing different types of clothes. And I remember at the time, you first start getting those looks of disapproval from people who are either older than you or people who come from a sort of different cultural background. And there's something very satisfying about it. Actually, my wife and I were out at lunch the other day, and I'm a man who is in his mid-40s. I feel like I dress relatively conservatively for the most part. I dress, I think, age-appropriate, which is another thing that I sort of respect about Henry Rollins. It's another way I've kind of modeled myself after Henry Rollins as I've gotten older. If you look at the way Henry Rollins has aged, the way he dresses, he's still cool. He still looks like this cool kind of old punk rock guy. But he doesn't look like he shops at Hot Topic anymore. And speaking of him and Billy Idol, who I love, and I'm not, dogging on Billy Idol, but, that's one thing you can say about Billy Idol is Billy Idol's a guy who's pushing almost 70 years old, and he still looks like he shops at Hot Topic. I love the way that Henry Rollins has aged. I love how he's sort of dressed down. And not that he was ever the Hot Topic punk, because he never was, obviously. But that's another way I've sort of, modeled myself after him a little bit, is you still want to look like an old punk rock guy, but you don't necessarily want to look like you still shop at Hot Topic. But the other day, my wife and I were out at lunch, this place here in Nashville we go to all the time, and as we walked into the place, as we were being seated, we both got this just death glare from this old, Tennessee fossil, and it was funny. It kind of reminded me of being, young when I first sort of, punk rocked myself out as far as my image goes. It kind of felt good, honestly. You kind of like it. There's something about it you still kind of like, you kind of like still getting that reaction from people. The next song after that is a song called Six Pack. I can tell you my personal experience back in my prime, my drinking prime. A six pack ain't gonna cut it, son. A six pack is just pre-game show as far as I'm concerned. I do love this song. Of course, this is one of the more famous songs on the record. I interpret this song as being, a couple of guys in Black Flag at least were straight edge. I've always sort of, I've always interpreted this as being kind of a straight edge anthem. Not necessarily looking it down on people that drink, but, maybe, judging people who drink excessively, people who become aggressive when they drink. I've heard other people suggest that this song was written about the band's original singer, Keith Morris, who, of course, was a pretty notorious drinker back in his younger days. Of course, Keith Morris, who's another one of my heroes, by the way. Keith Morris has been sober forever, but I've heard people suggest that the song was written about Keith Morris. I don't know that that's true or not. To me, I've always just sort of thought of this song as being sort of a kind of a straight edge anthem. Great song. I love it. But like I said, back in my prime, it's going to take more than a six pack. Just telling you. You might have to bring in at least a 12er to get started. And after that, we'll talk. The next song after that is a song called What I See. To me, this song is about the suffocating reality of suburban oppression, living in a world where everybody strives to be nothing more than clones of each other. To me, this reminds me of kind of the neighborhood that I work in. I've mentioned on this channel before, I work in an extremely affluent suburb outside of Nashville. All of these people that I work around, they basically all look alike. They all talk alike. They all are very sort of, status driven. They're into their SUVs. They're into their tea times. They're into their, ski trips during spring break. And really, not that there's anything wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with, falling into that sort of subculture of people. But when you're not a member of that subculture of people and you can sort of see it for the absurdity, at least in my opinion, that it is, it's somewhat funny. At least you try to make it laugh. You try to make it funny. If you don't laugh, you'll cry, basically. That's the way I see it, the people I work around. But to me, I love the song. What I see, it's basically, like I said, it's sort of looking at people who live their lives, with the goal of conformity, more or less, and seeing that as somebody, looking at it through the lens of somebody that's a nonconformist. The next song after that is another one of Black Flag's most well-known and popular songs. This one's called TV Party. In 1981, this song was probably written about people who, live their lives basically through the television. It reminds me of a song off of Morrissey's newest album, What Kind of Dog, or I'm Not a Dog on Chain. The song, What Kind of People Live in These Houses. The lyric Morrissey uses is, he says, they look at television thinking it's their window to the world. I think that's the same thing that Black Flag were saying in 1981. I think this song is even more applicable today, instead of it being necessarily sitting around the TV. It is living your life through the screen. All of us carry around little screens in our hands 24/7. I am as guilty as anybody of occasionally falling into the bad habit of doom scrolling. But, it's something that I do try to, keep on somewhat of a leash. Sometimes it is difficult for me. I'm one of those people, I can do this sometimes, where my wife and I will be looking at a movie, or we'll be watching a movie, and I'll think to myself, what was that guy in? And I'll grab my phone and I'll IMDb it. And next thing I know, it's 2 hours later and the movie's over and I haven't seen any of it. It reminds me of just today. I was out taking my dogs for a walk. It is quite lovely down here in Nashville. Right now, we have finally gotten into spring. Yeah, I'm talking about the weather. And there was a family out walking as I was walking the dogs, and you had the two parents and then the disgruntled teenage daughter. And you're just surrounded by natural beauty all the way, everywhere around you. Tennessee is quite beautiful, I have to tell you. Sometimes, as much as I make fun of Tennessee, it is quite beautiful. In a lot of ways, we're very lucky to live down here where we do. And the teenage daughter, surrounded by natural beauty all around her, is just walking, staring at her phone, watching something on her phone. And of course, I'm an old man in my 40s, but I'm thinking, like, man, put the phone down, breathe in the air, look at the trees, look at the birds, look at the wildlife. You're missing it, man. So I think the song TV Party is actually more applicable today than it was in 1981. It also reminds me of a guy that I used to be friends with back in the 90s. Now, he was a guy who was a lot of fun to hang out with for a long time. He was kind of a guy I went to a million shows with over the years. He's a guy who turned me on to a lot of music. He was somebody who became probably, my second best friend for a long time. And he was a lot of fun to be around. And at a certain point in time, he sort of began drinking in excess. I think his drinking had sort of started to become a problem. And every time after the last year or so I was friends with him, of course, I ended up moving away, which is what I do. It wasn't that we weren't friends anymore, but I ended up moving away. And for the last year or so that he and I hung out, his drinking had sort of become more of an issue. And when he drank, he didn't want to go out and drink. He didn't want to be social, which is fine. You don't want to go out and drink and drive, of course. I've done a lot of dumb things drinking, but I've never driven, at least I can say that. And it just got to the point where when you would hang out with this guy, he'd come over to your house, you'd go over to his house. He would buy a bottle of Captain Morgan, that was his thing. And he would just want to sit there and watch TV and just get hammered. And then pass out on the couch. And it got to where he was so unfun to hang out with after a while. And this was somebody that I used to go to shows with all the time. We had so much fun. We'd go out and do all kinds of, just fun, weird, nerdy kind of stuff. And at some point, his drinking just became an issue, and that's all he wanted to do. And you'd be like, hey, what are we going to do tonight? He's like, well, we're going to watch this movie, then we're going to watch that movie, then we're going to watch that movie. And you'd have 4 movies lined up. He wanted you to sit there and watch with him and, just sit there and drink and that became this. So this on TV party always reminds me of that, because I'd be like, oh my God, it's so boring. This guy used to be so much fun, and at a certain point, his drinking just sort of sucked the fun out of him a little bit. Speaking of that, the next song is called Thirsty and Miserable. Pretty self-explanatory. Song about alcoholism, I suspect. This song reminds me a little bit of myself, in a way, in my hardcore drinking days. I don't really drink that much at all anymore. A little bit here and there, but not like I used to. But I remember this song reminds me of a trait I used to have, where I would be out with friends, and as the night progressed, I would start to get a little bit fidgety if I didn't have reinforcements waiting for me at home. And as last call approached, if I had to make a stop on my way home to get more, alcohol, beer, or whatever, because, at 2 a.m. is a good time to start home drinking, I would start to get real weird, and I would always make an excuse to leave about a half hour before last call if I hadn't planned ahead and gone to the store before I went out. Now, if I went to the store and I had reinforcements waiting for me at home, I could be the funnest guy in the world. But I remember, I'd be out with friends, and 1 o'clock hits, and the corner store closes at 2, and I'm just like, oh my God, what am I gonna do? That's when you realize, oh, I'm a lot of fun. Maybe this isn't just all recreation. But that's what that song always makes me think of. The next song after that is another song on this record that I absolutely love. It is called Police Story. This song reminds me of one of the finest cinematic acting performances in one of the greatest movies ever made. Relevant to this topic, by the way, because it features our friend, and I'm speaking of Henry Rollins, in his role in the Charlie Sheen film The Chase. One of the greatest cinematic performances ever, where Henry Rollins portrays a police officer. There's Hank right there. A profession that we all know that Henry Rollins has a tremendous amount of love and respect for. If you've not seen The Chase, which I'm sure you have, but if you haven't, you have to check this movie out. This is one of the greatest movies ever made. I would put it right up there with The Godfather, Citizen Kane. You kind of see the direction I'm going. I actually just recently turned my wife onto this movie. She had never seen it. She had never heard of it. In her defense, she's much younger than I am. This was not a movie that came out when she was of movie watching age, I guess. So I recently made her watch it, and I sort of, whenever I make her watch movies that I love from when I was younger, I'm always a little bit, cautious, because her and I don't share opinions a lot on music and movies. But man, she absolutely loved this movie. She always tells me I should carry this movie around with a Sharpie, speaking of Rollins living in our neighborhood, just in case I ever run into Henry Rollins, because it'd be a good, conversation stimulator. And I always tell her I don't want to be known as the guy walking around my neighborhood with a copy of The Chase on DVD, although I'm not ashamed of loving this movie. It is one of the greatest films of all time. That is cinematic art in the highest level. The side one ends with a song called Gimme, Gimme, Gimme. This is a song I love, relatively self-explanatory. This is the desperate cry of somebody whose addiction is just all-encompassing. Basically, they're going to die. And either they don't care, or they feel powerless to prevent it. And this song is desperate. It's uncomfortable. It's one of my favorite songs on this record, which is one of my favorite American punk rock records of all time. Side B starts with maybe the best song on this entire record, in my opinion. The song is called Depression. This is written about a subject that I am an expert on. I remember the first time I read the lyrics to this song, I remember thinking to myself, this person gets it. You can have all of the PhDs in psychology and all of this, fancy education. But here's a guy in a shitty, crusty punk band who basically sums up what it's like to live with this disease in a 2-minute song that is so spot on it almost makes your hair fall out. I think it's probably the best song on the record. In my opinion, it might actually be my favorite song in the entire Black Flag catalog. After that, the next song is a song called Room 13. To me, the song is basically a desperate cry for any sort of emotional connection. Looking for somebody to give this person their life meaning, somebody to help them escape their own loneliness, their own mental health. It also makes me think that you can't necessarily envy the person envy the person that's going to meet the character in this song, because being put in the position of being somebody's entire life or somebody's reason for living is a lot of pressure. That's what it makes me think of. Is on one hand, you've got somebody who's just reaching out, desperate for anybody to show any amount of interest or make any sort of tangible, connection with. But then you think on the other hand, the person that's put in that position of man, I can't be your whole life, bro. You need to go out and get a job or something. It's a lot of pressure. I don't think I've ever been put in that position, and I hope I haven't put anybody else in that position. I don't think I have. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life, but I don't think I've done that. The next song after that is a song called Damaged 2. To me, this song is basically what it sounds like when you're pacing around in your bedroom having a panic attack. If this isn't what it sounds like, the song could at least induce a panic attack. This song is very uncomfortable. It's very chaotic. And I've been put in that position where I've been walking around. I'm having a bit of a nervous episode. I think I've mentioned the fact on this channel many times that both my wife and I are a couple of neurotic messes. And there are times I'm very capable of whipping myself up into a frenzy, catastrophizing everything in my life. That's what it reminds me of. This song is like a panic attack waiting to happen. The next song after that is a song called No More. This is the day, I think the song's written about the day you realize that you aren't really in control of your own life. You're at the mercy of your employer, your landlord, your creditors, the ruling class, your dogs that have to go out and take a dump twice a day. Basically, you have no control over your own life. The song is very depressing. In the song, they talk about, basically drinking it to escape, the monotony and the terror of your own life. The next song after that is a song called Padded Cell. If I had to pick a least favorite song on this record, it would probably be Padded Cell. Although I do like the song. It's easily my least favorite song on the record. There really isn't much on this record that I don't like. The song Padded Cell is probably my least favorite. The next song after that is a song called Life of Pain. Another song, the first time I read the lyrics, it just really hit me. This is a song that you really relate to, I think, if you're somebody who hasn't had your ass powdered your entire life. Somebody who comes from a family that maybe, you don't always go on the ski trip to Colorado for spring break. You aren't given the keys to a new BMW on your 16th birthday. Your dad isn't a legacy at the, most designer university that you were hoping to attend. Not that it's necessarily a bad life, but I think it's just, again, this was something I read, a song I read the lyrics to, and I remember thinking like, oh, man, these guys get it. This is sort of the way I feel about myself and my situation. The last song on the record is Damaged. The song is basically, this song reminds me of the first time I ever became familiar with who Henry Rollins was, as I mentioned before, through the Low Self-Opinion video on MTV. This song is basically what I pictured in my head Henry Rollins would be like if you ever had a conversation with him. This song is just pure evil. Like I said, the first time I ever saw Henry Rollins, he sort of scared me, freaked me out a little bit just based on his appearance. But I remember hearing the song Low Self-Opinion, and at the time it just, like I said, it just hit me right in the heart with a dagger. I think that's why I'm still such a fan all these over 30 years later. Anyway, Black Flag eventually broke up in 1986. The band has reunited on 3 different occasions since then, in 2003, 13, and 19. And, I just have very little interest in what this band is doing. Now, to me, this is Black Flag right here. This is my Black Flag. My Black Flag is, from 1981 to 1986. I think Greg Ginn, sadly, has proven on a number of occasions that he doesn't have any integrity. In my opinion, these reunions are a cash grab based on brand recognition. And I hate to say this, but I think if you are going to see Black Flag in the 2000s, you're kind of an idiot, honestly. I mean, you may as well go see Marky Ramone and his Cheese Dick cover band with a bunch of dorks playing, Ramone songs. I mean, you may as well just, go do that. Actually, I'll give Greg Ginn credit, at least in saying that at least he's the original member of Black Flag. I mean, I don't know. I don't have any understanding why anybody goes to see Marky Ramone, the replacement drummer of the Ramones, and a bunch of dorks that he plays with doing Ramone songs. I have no idea why anybody is even remotely interested in that. But I guess you're free to make up your own mind. Like I said, I would not go see, Black Flag or Marky Ramone for free, let alone have to pay for it. Like I said, if you were too young, like I was, to go see the Ramones, I mean, Black Flag, like I said, I was 11 years old when Black Flag broke up in 1986. Just own the fact that you missed it. You were too young. And going to see some cover band in 2003, 9, 19, whatever, that's not going to make up for the fact that you missed seeing Black Flag when they were actually Black Flag. What's happening now, or what has happened in the 2000s with Greg Ginn bringing the band back, to me is not Black Flag. This is it. I know my opinion isn't really worth a bag of beans, but somebody's got to have some damn integrity around here. I hate the idea of punk rock just becoming these like legacy band cash grabs, which is what I would accuse Greg Ginn of doing with whatever incarnations of Black Flag he has traveled out with since 1986. Sorry, that's just my opinion. You don't have to agree with it. I will not lose any sleep if you don't. Anyway, man, if you haven't in a long time or haven't at all, go back and check out Damaged by Black Flag. Like I said, this is one of the most important American punk rock records of all time. Dare I say, one of the best. And I am still a huge Rollins fan, some over 30 years later, after first discovering him through the video for Low Self-Opinion on MTV. Anyway, man, thank you so much for checking out this video. This is Archaic Records. My name is Jamie, coming at you from Nashville, Tennessee. Be sure to go out and support your local record store, like Seasick Records in Birmingham, Alabama. My wife and I will be in Birmingham in July for a show at a venue called the Nick in Birmingham, one of my favorite venues in such a cool city. So I'm excited to see Seasick Records again at that point in time. Be sure to check back every week for Morrissey Monday, a weekly celebration of all things Morrissey and the Smiths. as well as other record content and album reviews throughout the week. And until next time, my friends, I'll talk to you then.